Welcome to Leaders and Loggers, the podcast that quenches your thirst for leadership knowledge one pint at a time. Grab your favorite brew, sit back, and join us as we raise a glass to the world of leadership. I'm your host, Kevin Dawson, and each week we'll bring you refreshing conversations with leadership experts from around the globe. We'll dive into the minds of CEOs, thought leaders, and change makers, sipping on the secrets of their success. From the boardroom to the brewery, our guests share their unique perspectives on what it takes to lead in today's ever-changing world. Well, welcome to Leaders and Loggers podcast. I am your host, Kevin Dawson, and today I am joined by Kristin Gutierrez, who is a translation industry coach, best-selling author of Be a Better Sales Leader, and an international keynote speaker on imposter syndrome, confidence, and taking the initiative, and someone who I've got to know recently through our joined or combined, I don't know what to say here. This is kind of funny, but our friends Brian and Gab Boucher. Kristin, welcome to Leaders and Loggers.
Thank you so much for having me, Kevin. Yeah, mutual. Maybe our
mutual. Yeah, it's still early in the morning. I haven't had enough coffee today, and here we are about to. I haven't had coffee. Let's drink a beer. It's one of those days. Yay.
Yeah.
Well, today we are drinking a Moorfield Blonde Ale from 5x5 Brewing in Mission, Texas. I'll show this for everybody. So the term 5x5 was used within the military through World War II to mean I understand you perfectly, and is the predecessor to the term loud and clear. Did not know that.
Nice.
So cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
As we drink beer early in the morning.
Mm.
Yeah, it's just like tailgating. It is. I mean, we are recording in football season, so
it's 5 o'clock somewhere. Yeah,
exactly. Well, rest in peace, Jimmy Buffett. Well, that's a really tasty beer. But Kristin, we're not here to talk about beer. We're here to talk about your story. And from reading a little bit about your story and getting to hear some of your story, I would love for our audience to hear some of your story of where you've come from and how you've gotten to be in the position you are now.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. And it's always a good time of day to drink beer. So we are amongst good company. I went into the corporate world sometime after college. I did a job selling Yellow Page advertising right out of college. It doesn't really even exist anymore.
I haven't seen a Yellow Page book in forever.
And then I worked retail, where I just had a very micromanaging boss. I was working at Saks Fifth Avenue on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. So one of their flagship stores. I was opening the most number of credit cards in the store, like 3 months in a row. And I would have a boss that would be like, pick up that shirt. But like, I wasn't the person on the floor who had a problem picking up shirts. And it really became this thing for me where it was like, as a leader, you could pick up the shirt and then demonstrate to me, if I was one of those people that like would miss the shirts, how, lead by example. But also like, I just wasn't making money. So that's when I ended up in the translation industry after plastering my resume everywhere. And a year after joining a company to do inside sales, I was promoted to lead. And so as the book Be a Better Sales Leader goes, I didn't have an instruction book. There wasn't a manual. Somebody didn't say, here's how you are an inside sales manager now. Oh yeah, of a global team. You're going to be flying to Maidenhead in the UK several times a year. You're going to be managing, let's be frank, a team of older gentlemen, right? As like a young 25-year-old female. My parents were like, what do you do? And so from that moment, I figured out that if I need to be a leader, how to be a better leader, right? And it was to ask for a lot of help. It was to fail forward. It was to document processes and kind of come up with systems to make the jobs for my team easier. And that became then the premise of the book, Be a Better Sales Leader. So that's the beginning of my story. And then in the middle of 2023, at the beginning, in spring of 2023, I lost my W-2. And that was crazy because it was A, unexpected, and B, by that point in my career, I had made it to, 18 years later to be a vice president of sales, making a significant amount of income, and they pulled the rug out from under me. And I was like, what do I do now? And so I leaned into my strengths, which are sales and leadership and confidence and imposter syndrome and some of the things that you mentioned in the intro. And I said, okay, well, now is my chance to really serve others in a more fulfilling way. And so now, depending on when this comes out, like almost a year later, right? I walk around thanking the universe that this happened for me so that I could launch my own business and inspire others to get out of their own way and do the same, but also have a really big impact serving the translation and language services community with the skills and the strategies I've learned over the last 18 years. Yeah.
That's a lot. And I've been in your shoes where I was like, hey, I've lost my W-2 job. Now mine was back in COVID, and in understanding that fear of what do I do now. But I think you said some things along the way in your journey where, as you've learned in your leadership journey, things like, hey, I need to go do this because I'm not seeing this. Like, well, hey, I need to lead by example because obviously the person who was the leader wasn't leading by example. And it seems like there's so many leaders who really are just by title.
Yeah.
And I know your background in helping to coach people to be better sales leaders and in the sales world, which a lot of leaders are in the sales world. So many get promoted because they're great sellers, but not great leaders. Yep. And I would love to kind of just hear your thoughts on that mentality of the sales industry as a whole, where we go, hey, let's promote Joe because he's killing it in sales. So he needs to lead the team because he's so good at sales, but they don't really give that person the resources to lead.
You're right. And they might not want to be a leader. They might not be a natural born leader and or somebody who wants to grow into that role. So it is a very complex situation, especially in sales, because revenue hides all sins, and KPIs for sales are just very obvious. Like you're either getting the revenue, meeting your quota, or you're not. And if you're not, there's a little bit of wishy-washiness around like, okay, are you setting enough meetings? Are you doing all the right outbound? But like it all comes back to revenue. Whereas other functional departments at a corporation, it's like, well, how are we really holding KPIs to them? So within sales, the funny thing for me about my career, maybe I was just open for forever. Maybe I was a sponge that I just so desperately wanted to learn everything I could about this industry I knew nothing about and about being, sales. Maybe it's because I truly was surrounded by some of the best mentors, future mentor, the people I met at my first job became my lifelong mentors, right? So I think it was a series of things that kind of all coincided to make me see that, somebody who is a really great salesperson doesn't necessarily become a great leader. And you have to want, whether you're a naturally born leader because you're oldest of all your siblings, which I am not, right? Or I was the kid kind of packed in the middle who was like bossing my siblings around with our 1980s camcorder, making them do videos, setting the stage. We were like recording all these fun things, right? So there was leadership instincts in me. I know that's like, we should talk about that. Old clips. There was like leadership instincts in me, and then you still have to be put in positions to grow. The irony for me is like, ever since being promoted in 2005, 2006 to this leader, manager of global inside sales, what a title, right? I couldn't for the life of me get another leadership role for like 15 years, right? Oh, you don't have any experience. Oh, this, oh, that. Despite being a revenue quota carrying sales rep who was crushing my dollars, it was like, it really depends on what the organization's rule is for promoting from within versus hiring to, leaders into those new roles, and or how to coach executives on like, what's the best what's the best interest for your company? Taking somebody out of this individual contributor role and putting them into a leader, what is that going to do to biz dev, for example? I just think it's a fine line, and I think it depends on the culture of the company, and I think it depends on a lot of things, like who's at the executive level, to be able to figure out who should be promoted and who should not. Right.
Right. So there seems to be like still this stereotype within the corporate world that, to your example of, hey, you got this job, but you couldn't get a promotion for nearly 15 years, that sometimes hiring with outside the organization is best, or sometimes people put so much emphasis on the credentials of somebody. They've got these degrees from these universities, or they've got these certificates, or they've done these things, versus actually looking at the individual.
Yeah.
Do you think that's still the norm?
I don't know if it's the norm, but I know it happens, right? I also know certain personas, it's not a man or a woman thing. It's just like certain people are able to interview better than others. And I get it. It's like, yeah, it's a performance almost, right? You are interviewing for the job. You need to be able to talk and communicate your ideas. But there have definitely been, in my experience, people who are really good at the thing. And then sometimes that doesn't translate to results at the back end. So it is a hard, complicated job for the exec team, for the HR team, for the hiring manager themselves, to be able to weed out people who are really good interviewers, and on the one end of the spectrum, versus people on the other end who, like, maybe you're pulling them over from a cross-functional role, right? In a sales role, should they have had sales experience before? Probably, right? But like, depending on the organization, depending on the structure, depending on what the company ultimately is selling, an operational person, a solution architect type person, an engineer, like, often these people are customer facing, and depending on the complexity of the organization, sometimes they're upselling, they're cross-selling, like sometimes they truly are driving business, and they're not going to make your typical VP of sales candidates. But like, I did a poll on LinkedIn not too long ago, which is like, would you hire for character or skill? And it's funny because everybody says a little bit of both, right? But I think, to your point, what are the skills that are transferable from one job to another? And then ultimately, what's the character of the person and like their traits? Because culture is something at an organizational level that you just cannot take for granted.
I completely agree with you. It makes me think of, did you ever watch The Office?
Oh, yeah.
So do you remember when I forget what season it is, but they bring in Charles Minor to come in? Idris Elba comes in as Charles Minor, who is this new kind of manager overseeing operations at the Scranton branch. And Michael is sitting there talking to him and goes, so where did you come from before? And he goes, well, I came from Satakoya Steel. And Michael goes, you're not from paper. But I think that it shows that, to your point, sometimes having that outside experience benefits just as much as sometimes having internal experience benefits. And so for listeners who are listening to our conversation going, well, how do we navigate that process? How do we weigh those things? What would you say to them to say, well, these are some of the best practices that I would encourage you with?
Yeah, I think there's two talk tracks here. One is if I'm talking to an executive about how they're forming and structuring their business for the long-term growth. That's something I love to do, right? And so to the CEO or to the other executives, I would say, like, what really, like, let's start at culture, and like, you've got mission, vision, and values, but like, really truly, like, what's your culture and what's your growth strategy? Is your strategy to sell? Is your strategy to buy? And like, what does that look like for 5-10 years? And how many are you? $10 million today? Are you 100 million? Are you $1 billion? And like, where are you going in the next 5-10 years? How are you getting there? Those are fundamental questions to truly understand a more simplistic question, which is like, how do you hire somebody? Do you bring them in from outside or inside, right? And what are you trying to do with that person for that role? Because depending on their growth strategy and their trajectory and the size of their current company, really starts to like self-identify what the best type of person is. Plus they know their people. So like, if there is somebody internally that could potentially be the next VP of whatever, then you do want to take that into serious consideration, because it creates a great culture, right? I mean, if that's depending on where the CEO is going. The other side of that is if you're an individual contributor, or if you're a W-2 employee, if you're working in the company, if you're trying to be seen, like I needed to be seen. So I took a job as a strategic account manager. I think they gave me a senior in front of my title when I joined the last company I was with. And I just worked really hard. I worked so hard that in the first 6 months, it was a new year already. And I was given like their most strategic account. And then I was given another one and another one. And so I knew that I was demonstrating value, but it wasn't enough. I wanted to climb the ladder. And so I figured out how to self-identify a champion. So that's number one, is like self-identify a champion. And then number two, you need outside external mentors. Is there a champion internally who will help get you from point A to point B? And sure enough, he did. I was promoted to director of account manager, which was a leader role, at 9 months pregnant. And I was like shouting from the rooftops. Somebody only recently said, wow, how much stress was that? But I never actually looked at that narrative of the story. I was so grateful that a company saw so much value in me, even at 9 months pregnant, about to go on maternity leave, that they were like, I had to interview for the job, but you are the right person. You have the right skill set. We're excited to have you grow with us. Go have your baby. And when you come back, the promotion's in effect, right? Like, to me, that just spoke volumes of the company. And then from there, it became, vice president. But ultimately, like, if you're in the position I was in, right, maybe you're switching companies, or maybe you're within your current company, you need to identify a champion, somebody to help get you there. Also sometimes known as an executive sponsor, but that's also a little bit different, but like truly a champion, right? And then find mentors outside of your comfort zone, like industry, and then pick up books like Be a Better Sales Leader. Take out the word sales, as you know, Kevin, right? And it's just truly all about being a better leader.
Absolutely. You've mentioned this a couple of times now about mentorship.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the fact that you talked about, in your first job, you made some mentors along the way, because there are still people that I talked to from my first job. Like, we have a group text now 15 years later that still goes on daily, where and none of us live in the same cities anymore. Like, we are geographically spread apart. I think the closest former coworker I have is 20 miles away. The others are 5 to 6 hour drives away. And but I think that there is something so valuable to people who go, hey, don't discount those first relationships. And I want to just kind of hear from your experience with people who have mentored you. What is the value that you've gotten over the years from having a mentor? And the second part is, how do you be a good mentee?
Oh, that's great. That is a great question. I don't think people ask that question enough. I also think, I don't know if you agree, but like, a lot of times you're like, oh, wow, Allison is my mentor in hindsight, right? So same thing, like Allison and I text, not all day, every day. We aren't in a group chat, but like at any time can text her, call her, or LinkedIn message her, comment on her stuff. And it's like, she was the person who at the time was an outside sales rep, a BDM in our industry, and I was inside sales. The better she made me, because I was supporting her and 6 other reps, the better her business would grow, right? And she saw that spark, the fire. She saw the je ne sais pas in me to be able to say, I'm gonna invest my time and my effort in her, because the more I do, the more it'll come back to me. And that's fair to her, right? So that's fair. And then 18, 19, 20 years later, it's like, holy cow, like, thank you for being such a good mentor. So don't discount the people in your life, especially if you're just starting out in your career, or you're at a new company, or like, look at who has influenced you or who has impacted you or who has helped you grow. And often those people, whether officially defined as mentor or not, are truly your mentor. And then to answer your second part of the question, the other thing is you have to also seek out mentors. So I sought out my CEO at my last company to be my mentor. And I said, I had to reach out to him multiple times because he is a CEO and he was busy, right? And I had him on a call one day and I was like, Nick, like, did you see my email about wanting me to, because I knew that if he would mentor me, I could keep climbing the ladder. And that is how I went from director to vice president. And he just truly hadn't seen the email, right? And we cannot anticipate, if we are not a CEO of a 80 million or $100 million company, how many emails they get, how they're pulled in so many different directions. So you need to know it's not personal. And the best advice he gave to me was the answer to your question, which is, the mentor is the one who decides the direction. So like it or not, the mentee, if you ask somebody to mentor you in official capacity, the mentee needs to adapt to what the mentor is coaching on or teaching on, because otherwise it's just not a good fit. And so it's okay if this doesn't end up being a good fit. You and I individually and independently need to recognize whether it is. So we'll show up at our designated, it was like an every other week type thing. We'll show up every other week for 30 minutes or whatever. And you can ask me a question and I will take you on a journey. Right. And this relationship becomes redundant when you stop getting value from it and you stop showing up, from my perspective. And it was just really interesting because all of my mentors to date had always been in hindsight, like Allison, right? Or they were leaders that are significantly influential in my industry who I actually left my W-2 and took a contract job at this tech company in order to be influenced and like rub elbows with some of these really high-powered leaders, right? And it was a great career move for me. So it's like, depending on how you find your mentors, but I would encourage everyone to personally seek people out, people that are like a little bit beyond your stretch. And don't fear that if they don't respond to your first outreach, that means they're not interested. Just like anything in life, you need to ask, you need to be a little driven and ask a few different times, a few different ways. And then, what is their style of wanting to mentor somebody in an official capacity? And does that work for you? Because if it doesn't, you just should go find someone else.
Love it. Love it. So you have written this book, you're working to develop leaders. And I know that, talking with sales leaders that I've talked to, there's a lot of conversations on the change in the sales process nowadays, where it used to be, it took 7 touches. Now it's like 14 touches and growing, because we are bombarded with so many things. To your point, if I'm trying to reach a CEO, my first email or first phone call is probably not going to get through to them. Now, if it does, it's like, hitting a hole in one on golf. You get lucky sometimes. But as you are coaching leaders with a world where there is so much noise and distraction that keeps our messages from getting through to get someone's attention, what are some things that you are helping them with that kind of says, hey, if you're going to be a better sales leader and develop your teams this way, what are some strategies that they can employ to get their messages through?
Yeah, to me, it's a great question, because there's a 2-prong approach, which is depending on the role you are in the organization as a sales contributor, there is a notion of like, using various technologies that exist now or platforms like ZoomInfo, et cetera, to send mails through your CRM that is going to hit a certain person, right time, right place. But truly, the second prong would be, I built my whole career, and I'm talking about joining like up to 6 different language services providers throughout my career, and every time being given like $1 million quota, Like I didn't come into any inherited business. I had no, ironically, despite starting as inside sales myself, being in a support role, I never had inside sales supporting me when I was a contributor. So I had to hunt and kill everything myself, right? But there's a way to do it that allows you to be human. And I think that today and 2024 and beyond is so important, is this level of humanity, especially with AI and all the things, right? And so I coach organizations on how to leverage technologies like LinkedIn, for example, and to reach out in direct message without selling. I do master classes, I do workshops for companies, and it's really about like building. I truly think people buy from people they know, like, and trust, and who differentiate. So like in the language services industry, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and there are hundreds of thousands of companies providing the services. In our industry, we cannot compete on price, quality, and turnaround time. We have to sell on value. Yet, so often we are competing on price, quality, and turnaround time. And so how do you build relationships with people who don't know you, who don't like you, who don't trust you? And how do you leverage platforms like LinkedIn to become a subject, be seen as a subject matter expert in my own individual branding, to put out the right content that's attracting my what is my vertical approach, like what has been assigned to me as a territory, and am I talking their language to them in my human posts? And then how am I using ninja strategies like, are you open to a call on X, Y, or Z, in order to like slide into people's DMs and ask permission to like your content, engage with your content, and or have a call. And so it's been really effective, well, as an individual contributor, as leading a team, and now in my consulting and coaching business to help others deploy these strategies. Because in a world of bombarded notifications, right, how do you differentiate, and how do you get that your message responded to? And it's not, hey, I'm selling this, come buy from me.
You're so right. I spent the last week up in lovely Michigan, which whoever sold me on, hey, let's go to Michigan in fall, didn't tell me that yes, it is lovely this time of year, but it also rains a lot. And so I spent the week in cold and rainy Michigan, but it was all about that sales process of selling on the value, not just necessarily the price. What's the solution? And I think so many times as leaders, we love what we do, and we get caught up in our solutions and go, hey, this is that cool shiny object that we like to say, this is what differentiates ourselves. But so many times it feels like we don't actually speak to what that business, whoever we're selling to, what their needs are, how do we align that business fit over the solution? Like, let me help you understand that I understand you so well that this is how I align. The solutions that we have will support you, but we've got to share here's where our aligned values are. I think that is something that so many leaders forget, because we're so driven by, I got to get that quota across the line.
Yep. Yeah, right. I mean, right. There's a lot of pressure, but you're right. I mean, same. At the end of the day, it's like, it all is, we need to share this message. We cannot share this message enough or loud enough to articulate the point that it's not about us at all. It really is about them, and what are they trying to do, and speaking their language. My second half of my career, one of the places I worked for 6 years, we were given tons of outside professional training, and it really was impactful. I could text one of my old friends to be like the hammock, and he'll know exactly what I'm talking about, because it was one of the sales strategies we learned at this 2-day training, right? And so it's like, how do you speak their language in the way that, like, even your decks, I mean, everybody in marketing, close your ears, because like my decks, my team's decks, I coach clients now on like, yes, our branding matters, but so does their imagery. So does them. Like, where is them? Where are they in our decks? Why are we starting off our pitches with like, oh, but let me just pause and tell you for 3 minutes about who we are? No, like structure the agenda, make it all about them. Everyone wants the thought-provoking questions, but unless you truly structuring your meetings and your presentations in a way that encourages that upfront, and like you set the stage and you use the things that you've learned in the pre-calls in those meetings, then ultimately like you are setting yourself, you might still win, but you're setting yourself up to fail more often than truly coming up with a solution, the shiny object that you want to sell, but in a way that makes sense for them speaking their language. I mean, it makes all the difference between good and great.
No, I completely agree with you. And you don't have to be a sales leader to understand this concept. If you want to lead people and lead people well, you have to make it about them, because leaders have no power without followers.
I love that.
Well, Kristin, it is time for last call. And so for our listeners, what is something that they can be doing this week to be a better leader?
One of my favorite questions is how to like lean in, right? And I would say something that's so often overlooked is appreciation of the people on your team. So there's multiple ways that you can right now go to everyone individually on your team or one person, or make this a recurring habit where you shout people out. I would encourage you to use the platform LinkedIn to publicly declare why you are appreciative of your direct report or of a cross-functional colleague. There's something in LinkedIn called kudos, where they make it super easy to give somebody kudos. Or like what I like to do is have a meeting like this, snip a picture, right? Pause, take a picture, and then post about them on LinkedIn as to why not only do you appreciate them, but like what they've done to impact you. Because there's one thing to say, oh, great job, Kevin, I liked the spreadsheet. It's another thing to say, wow, Kevin, thank you so much for going above and beyond to put that spreadsheet together for the client. The outcomes that you shared really had an impact on the message that, they were hoping that we understood. And it's kind of like going one step further with your feedback. So if you're not giving feedback at all right now, I would encourage you, that's the easiest thing to start to do. But as you're giving feedback over the course of time, make it more meaningful, make it more personable, and take advantage of something so simple like that.
Well, thank you for that, Kristin. So Kristin, for our listeners, how can they learn more about you, find the book, Be a Better Sales Leader? Where are you at, and how can they connect?
So the book can be found on Amazon, Be a Better Sales Leader, and I can be found at KristinGutierrez.co. You can text strategy to 33777. And I'm very visible on LinkedIn. I would love to connect with everyone.
I love it. Well, we'll put all of that in the show notes, and if you're watching this, you'll see it pop up on the screen. Kristin, thank you so much for joining me for a pint and conversation today. I thoroughly enjoyed listening and learning from you, and I'm sure our listeners did as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you so much for listening to the Leaders and Bloggers podcast. If you loved what you heard today, send this to a leader who needs to hear this conversation. And if you've not subscribed, we're on all the major streaming platforms and on YouTube. And I hope you'll join us next week for another pint and conversation. We'll see you then.